Hello everyone. The solar eclipse will be April the 8th, 2024, and I drove about 300 miles out of Virginia into the path of totality. I am just outside of Cleveland. I'm in a suburb, actually in Akron, near Akron, Ohio, and the weather forecast is 50%. It might be better here than it is in Texas. That's where I was originally going to go. But I took a gamble and decided to travel the lesser distance up to Ohio rather than drive down to Texas, 1,400 miles one way. So I'm here, and I've had plenty of time to dial in my settings, to do practice sessions, and I go through everything in my head as well. And fortunately, I'm in a room that faces in the direction where the sun will be, so I've been able to do practice sessions within the comfort of my room. Big picture window. I have a full view. I'm at a hotel where I've already staked out an area where I can go out and set up my kit and be comfortable to capture the entire eclipse. It does seem that we're going to have favorable conditions, even though with some clouds in the sky, where I'll be able to capture the eclipse. So I want to share with you my settings that I've dialed into my Sony a6700. I know that everyone doesn't have an a6700 camera, but this is just a guide. I've watched a lot of videos on the process, and what I haven't seen are videos that would take advantage of the memory settings within these newer cameras. Now on the a6700, I have three settings or three memory slots that I can configure. And rather than going in and setting things up manually, say for the partial and then for totality, my thinking is why not just assign a preset for each of those phases. So for the partial eclipse, I will assign those settings to preset or memory setting 1, and for totality, those settings for memory setting 2, and reserve memory setting 3 for, say, Bailey speeds. And that's exactly what I've done. Now let me show you the process and the tools that I've used. Now here's a website, xhubier.free.fr, and I'll leave a link to the description. This is a really nice tool, and as you can see here, it shows the path of totality. Now I'm going to zoom into my location up near Cleveland. And you can see Cleveland up there in the upper left-hand corner. And I'm here in Akron, so I'm going to tap on Akron. As you can see, Akron is within that shadow or path of totality, so I'm going to tap on Akron and get the data. Now, this data is in UTC, so if you come over to the left-hand side, where you see that yellow icon of a person, just below that is a timer button. If you tap on that, it's going to change those UTC times to local time. So I can see that here, where I'm at, the start of the partial eclipse, that's C1, contact 1, will start at 13:59, that's 1:59 p.m. And the start of the total eclipse will be at 15:14 or 3:14 p.m. And so it gives those times there. What I'm looking at firstly is the altitude of the sun in the sky. If you look where it says start of partial eclipse, C1, and then you see date, then you see time, then you see alt or altitude, it shows 55.8 degrees. That's the angle or altitude of the sun in the sky. If you come down several rows, you'll see maximum eclipse, that's totality. That begins at 3:15, and the altitude in the sky will be 48.8. So I use that data to help me to locate the sun. I know where the sun's going to be, but also to input some settings in another tool on this website that I'm going to show you in a few moments. If you look at the very top, it shows that the total solar eclipse, that is totality, where I'm at, will be 2 minutes and 45.9 seconds. So I know that the altitude of the sun is going to be at the beginning of the eclipse at 55.8. So I'm going to go to another section of the website, and I'll leave a link to that description here. So this is the shutter speed calculator, and this helps me to dial in settings. So over to the far right, upper right, altitude of the sun, I'm going to change that 30 to 55. Elevation of the observer, it's relatively flat here. But I'm going to look over here to the left-hand side, far left-hand side, And the filter that I will have on my lens will be this one here. So I'm going to tap that radio button there. Just to the right of that, you see camera settings. I'm going to leave the camera settings at ISO 100, the aperture at f8. Those are not going to change throughout the duration. The partial phases and totality, I'll leave my ISO at 100 and my lens aperture at f8. The only thing that's going to change will be the shutter speed. Okay, so now that I have that punched in, it shows the suggested shutter speed that I should be using, which is 1/800th of a second. So that's the shutter speed I will use for the partial phases, C1, C2, C3, and C4. If I want to capture during totality, something, let's say for example, inner corona less than 0.2 solar radius, ISO stays the same, aperture stays the same. The shutter speed changes. So for totality, my shutter speed, I will set that to 1/50th of a second. So for memory preset 1 on the A6700, these are the settings I will set in for the partial phases. ISO 100, aperture f8, and shutter speed at 1/800th of a second. Memory preset 2 will be set for ISO 100, aperture f8, shutter speed 1/50th of a second. So all I have to do is simply flip between memory setting M1 for the partial phases and M2 for totality. At the very bottom here, lower left, that's what that will look like. I'm going to keep it simple for myself, and I'm going to do this. But since I'm using exposure bracketing, my camera will automatically get this one, that one, that one. So I will have exposure bracketing also preset into the memory 2 preset of the A6700. Now for M3, for the memory setting 3, there are only 3 memory presets I can set into the A6700. I'm going to reserve that for Bailey's beads. So up here at the upper left hand side here, I'm going to select Bailey beads for the filter that will be on my camera, which is this one here. And these are the settings, or this is the shutter speed I will set for memory preset 3. And again, ISO stays the same, 100. The aperture stays the same, f8. The shutter speed will be the only thing that will change, 1/200th of a second. So that'll be for memory preset 3, if I decide to use it. It's easier to have presets inputted into your camera rather than going in and manually changing things. Over to the right, what is all this information over to the right? Well, this will give you a visual of what you're capturing depending on the type of camera that you have and the focal length that you'll be using. Now, the A6700 is not a full frame camera. It is a Sony APS-C camera, so I'm going to select that. And the focal length that I'll be using, 400 millimeters. And if you look over to the directly across to the right, it shows that the effective focal length for a natural setting of 400 millimeters on that telephoto lens is 608 millimeters. And it shows you just below there what that's going to look like. Another tool that I use is found on this website, moonzoom.world. And what this does, this will give you an indication as to what your capturing will look like. So the first thing you need to do is set in your camera settings. Now, my sensor type on my camera, like I just mentioned previously, is not a full frame camera. So I'm going to pull down here and select APS-C. I'll go with the Nikon. It's the closest I can get. And my focal length, I have that set to 400. That's as far as I'm gonna go. And what makes this useful is that it helps me to put the sun in a frame. Because while all this is happening, the sun is moving. Well, the sun really isn't moving. You will see the sun move from the left to the right. And so what I want to do is get the sun in frame, say maybe to the far left. That way, I don't have to play around and move the gimbal around or lens around because it's difficult to find the sun. So once I get the sun initially focused in and locked into the frame, I'm going to move the sun or move the lens so that the sun will be to the far left. Now, if I tap on this Earth rotation button, what's happening now, even though it's happening very slowly, you can see the sun moving to the right very slowly. What this helps me to do, depending on the focal length that I've selected, what it's going to look like. And I don't want to touch my gimbal. So what I want to do is get the sun in the frame to the far left. enough to where the corona is not going to be cropped out, but a little bit to the left, so that way as it's moving across the sky to the right, I don't have to touch my tripod and lens. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be doing. I hope this makes sense. We'll see how things work out on Monday. And I hope that wherever you are, that you have good enough skies to where you can witness the eclipse. And don't forget to wear your solar glasses. Don't use sunglasses. They will not work. Do not look at the sun through a telescope without a filter on it, or a binoculars without a filter on it, or your camera without a filter on it, because you can damage your eyes. So until Monday, you guys take care.